Homelessness and Housing Subcommittee, we have a one agenda item and we appreciate the update on hearing from staff. So I'll turn it over to Daniel. No one's looking at me, so I'm not sure. John.
Well, it's going to be kind of a team effort here today between Andrea, Christine, Daniel, and myself. But really what we wanted to do is in anticipation of next week's Homelessness Solutions Working Group meeting, we wanted to touch base with this committee to talk about what potential options look like for making changes to the camping ordinance. And this is something that I think we alluded to over the course of the last 6 months, as we've told the public that we're going to be doing a reevaluation of the camping ordinance this spring. And we developed a couple recommendations that we'd like to at least walk through with you all to get your feedback, but then also with the public hearing and have an opportunity to weigh in on that as well. So I'm going to pass it over to Christine while I pull up my notes from our meeting yesterday. So
Just to briefly add on to what John was saying, we wanted to make sure we had an opportunity to meet with the subcommittee and get some early feedback on some changes that the staff are recommending to the ordinance, as well as the update that's going to council before the next homelessness solutions group, which I believe is next week on the
next week.
on the 11th. So because what we'd like to be able to do, even though it's not the full body of the council, we'd like to be able to represent that the subcommittee is supportive of staff's recommendation moving forward to the full council in early April.
Okay. So with that in mind, one of the things that we're currently looking at is with the release of the fire hazard severity maps. There are a number of parks within San Rafael that fall within a moderate or high fire severity zone. And when we start looking at what could be, a change to our approach to the camping ordinance, the fire hazard severity zones presents this opportunity to kind of marry two public policy options, whereby the community is very concerned about fire risk associated with homeless encampments. And then the state is also, telling us that we have to be also, mindful of fire risk, and some of these zones are. The total number of parks that fall within the fire severity zone, it brings us to a place where the number of parks that aren't in a fire severity zone is less than those who are. So there's a kind of a critical mass of the parks that fall within the fire severity zones, such that when we look at making a recommendation or any kind of changes to the camping ordinance, staff is recommending that city council make changes to prohibit camping in all parks on the basis of this fire severity zone issue. Now, outside of that, we've had conversations around making adjustments to setback requirements, as well as, the 10-foot setback from, the 5-foot setback from roadway pavement, as well as the setbacks for the playgrounds and schools. And when we start looking at the legal framework, where we are coming out of the Boyd lawsuit, and also I think as a value for the organization, where we don't want to just, at least presumably, prohibit camping in the entirety of the city. We have to start looking at, well, what are these options? And, you start pushing the envelope on, well, if we do parks and then we start adjusting other setbacks, then are we effectively doing such a thing? And that's not what staff would be recommending in terms of an action. So the question for the committee today is, one, we want to get feedback just generally on, our thinking on this, but then two, the question is, well, is it a function of the prohibition in parks, or is it a function of adjusting the setbacks from roadways as well as parks and schools? And staff would recommend that under the fire hazard severity zone justification, that the city proceed with prohibiting camping in parks, but not touching any of the existing setbacks under the ordinance as it pertains to roadway, pavement, and schools and playgrounds.
And if I may just, I
Yeah.
think it'd be really helpful and important if, before we get into Q&A, if Andrea could kind of, if you don't mind explaining kind of the legal rationale. And my oversimplified non-legal brain is that there's a range of risk of lawsuit that we're trying to manage in making any change to the proposed ordinance. And that there are trade-offs, and that if we were to like add up multiple changes, it increases our legal risk of a lawsuit. And, but I'd prefer you speak to
Sure.
kind of what
Sure.
the specifics of that.
So I don't know about the likelihood of a lawsuit. I think that's probably, that can be equal across all matters. What, well, attorneys really look at is, if we do get that lawsuit, can we defend it? Can we prevail?
Right.
And so, one of the themes that, may come out as we discuss this further is really what is the data supporting? And with the fire severity map, we have the data to support that there are two competing public interests here. We have, the public policy regarding homelessness and how do you handle that, but also the mitigating fire. And so, in marrying those two, policies together, as John had, mentioned earlier, it makes sense. And the data is supporting that decision because of all the work that the state is doing in putting out those, fire maps. And so the data is what will be helpful in defending any lawsuit. And that's what makes it more likely, hopefully more likely that the city's policy would carry the day. With the other options that John had identified in working with staff, the data just, it wasn't at the same strength as the one related to the fire severity maps. And so in terms of navigating legal risk, again, it's, you know, whether we get sued, you know, who knows? That is probably the same, but it's really about defending the lawsuit.
And I would just add to that, one of the things that we know is that because of the Boyd case, let's just for a minute hypothetically say we get sued,
As we have every single. time.
as we have
Yeah,
every
yeah,
single
that's a
time.
pretty
So
good-
I think it's
yeah.
a fair assumption that we will anticipate litigation for
Yeah.
any change in our ordinance.
Yep.
It doesn't mean we don't do it, it's just we
Right.
know that that's a likelihood. So because of the Boyd case, we anticipate that the courts will bring any future litigation to Judge Chen. And the experience that we've had with Judge Chen is lengthy. And one of the things I wanted to remind the committee and the public of is the Boyd case before Judge Chen. And then we also have this layering of grants pass, which provides a little bit more flexibility, but it doesn't eliminate the legal risk. Is that Judge Chen's perspective early on in our lawsuit was, because the city's not willing to put a sanctioned camping area together, then I'm gonna penalize you and you can't prohibit camping. We now have a sanctioned camping area, which is helpful in defending the lawsuit. However, theoretically, further reducing or further prohibiting camping in any way, based on what we know of him, will say, well, you're, show me the map, show me the data, show me the circles of where people can camp and where people can't camp. So thinking through that lens and making sure that those circles are still significant enough for our case to be strong enough for him to say, you are not effectively banning camping in your city. That's what we're really trying to make sure we have a strong defense for. So the cumulative changes, so say we could do just the parks that are in the fire hazard zone. Or we could do all the parks. Or we could do all the parks and more setbacks, but the layering of them then makes those circles much, much smaller. And I think we really put ourselves in a position where we sacrifice, where our case isn't as strong. And what we sacrifice and what we're trying to gain out of not being in litigation is just not the cost and hassle of litigation, but it's the precious few staff we have to work on solutions and interim housing and getting people on their pathway to housing is completely sucked up again into lawsuits and responding to the judge's request for information and data. And we really want to try to have an ordinance that we can count on and rely on for the long term and solves all the multiple problems, multiple public policy problems, multiple problems for the community, and also has a compassionate response to the unhoused community. So just wanted to kind of round that out because, you know, the analysis is complex. If we had a different judge, like for example, the judge that's heard Nevada's case,
He did our mediation, we know Judge Owen.
our risk would be very different. And so we have to keep into consideration what we anticipate.
I think that the what ifs of leading to a lawsuit can be numerous, and there's so many different factors at play. And so I would say my sort of general legal advice would be, let's look at the policy option and then look at the data that's supporting those policy options. Because then that makes the story easier to tell. There's no guarantee as to there's no guarantee that we will be sued. No guarantee that if we are sued as to what will happen or the legal theories that we've sort of thought about to date. You know, there's many plaintiff lawyers out there. There's that many different. And so when you're faced with that sort of legal exposure with a policy like this, it's, you know, focus on what you think the best policy options are and what's supported by the data. So just to keep something more general in mind as you work through this discussion today.
And I just want to call out, you know, as we talk about the data, I think generally the camping ordinance is working. And what we're seeing from the SRPD folks who are out every Tuesday and patrolling the city, and particularly along Anderson, while it's not, you know, the tidiest place in the city, our number of citations that we are issuing to the number of folks who are out there has been continually declining week after week, that people are starting to more or less voluntarily comply with our regulations in a way that I think was the intent of the camping ordinance. The other part of this is that we know, because SRPD is also out in all of our parks, including, you know, some that the community is particularly concerned about, i.e. Gerstle. And we know that we haven't had people camping in our parks. And in my time here, I can only think of a limited number of circumstances and times where that has been the case. What we are running ourselves into and what I'm getting and what Daniel and Mel are taking the brunt of is the community's ongoing concern of what the ordinance does allow as it relates to individuals camping in our parks. And while there may not be people who have been doing that, the difference between what the data shows and then the perceptions and the reality of what our residents are experiencing, those two things in terms of a Venn diagram are not overlapping in a way that would be a neat way to, you know, package together.
We get the reality check.
I know we want to turn over. I just want to
Yeah.
make one more point onto that I think is really important. That's, we've got legal risk, and then we have, and I credit Mel and Daniel to this, who are boots on the ground and really understand the behaviors and the movement. If we were to say, increase the setback from roadways to 20 feet, that will effectively end camping on Anderson. And the concern would be, and part of the reason we're recommending all camps prohibiting camping in all parks rather, is that we would not want to solve one problem and create another, which would be if folks from Anderson couldn't park on Anderson, the fear or concern would be that they would start camping in parks because, and that's a public asset and public space. And so we're in a position right now where that's not a problem, but we know that people are going to shift and move, and we're trying to figure out where is the least impactful place in the city that's still compassionate and humane for those folks that we haven't been able to get in a better situation off the street yet. But also, again, we don't want to solve one and create two.
And sorry, just to piggyback on Christine's comment. John, is there anybody camping right now?
we're not aware of anyone camping.
No,
So
I mean,
that's an important.
It is a really important.
so I have a bunch of questions, but why don't we start? You go first. You go first.
Okay.
And then
So first, that was about really my first question was the data. And because to me, we have to really be clear on what is the problem we're trying to solve, and we're sort of bouncing. Are we solving a problem that we have people camping in the parks? That's one problem. Apparently we don't, because we don't have the data that actually shows that. Are we trying to solve a problem that there's people camping on Anderson, even though they're currently complying with our ordinance? There's never going to be a strong enough ordinance to not have people camping on Anderson unless we were to say no camping on Anderson. So I don't know if even tweaking an ordinance that sort of modifies what's happening on Anderson makes sense. I am very concerned about using the fire severity maps as trying to draw a correlation to an ordinance that doesn't have data behind it. We want to use those fire hazard maps coming from the state they were not developed to address homelessness in parks. And I'm really concerned the message we would be sending across the county and across everywhere to use, because we want to use those maps for a really different reason.
you want to do your questions and then we'll do commentary? I
So
don't
that was,
Okay.
that was
No, just because,
for-
yeah.
Yeah, no,
of
I
course,
get
because
it.
it's gonna-
I get
wanna
it, but
build
I
on
mean,
what you're saying.
I think the question is, how do you really defend using the hazard severity maps to justify and correlate to homelessness in parks? That to me is apples and oranges.
I think that's.
I'm happy to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good question.
And then I
We're gonna
think,
do them all or?
okay, we can.
Okay.
Yeah.
So with these maps, the discussion becomes then, what are the building standards, and the fire mitigation, activities that have to occur in those, like a yellow and an orange zone. And so having an encampment within that zone is inconsistent with those requirements. And so that's where the tie-in comes, that you have your new construction that will have to comply with certain standards, but an encampment won't. And at the end of the day, a fire, it doesn't really matter where it's not going to distinguish between new construction or an encampment. It's the fact that the activity is occurring. So that's why there's the tie-in to these new maps.
But any encampment would not comply to any building code.
That is true, but these encampments are in areas where you are surrounded by timber. And so that
As
is
opposed to Anderson.
exactly. And also Anderson is a, busy thoroughfare. You see a flame, okay. Our parks, and I'll take Bristol Park as an example. There are portions where you could get something smoldering and nobody's gonna see that right away. And so this correlation between the maps and the parks, is why there's this. We think that tying it to the maps, supports the prohibition of camping in the parks.
That's your only question?
Right now,
Oh, okay,
because I'm.
okay. So, yeah, no, thank you. Take a deep breath. So John, you started out about talking about the number of parks, and I understand the rationale, but I'm just, this is a curiosity questions, which parks are not in? It's not in, I guess, not in the map,
In
or,
the map.
yeah.
It's easier to answer the
It's-
other way
yeah,
around.
It's easier
Oh,
to
oh, okay,
answer
sorry.
the other way around.
So wait, which
but-
ones are in the map?
Yeah,
Okay.
so, Peacock Gap falls within Gerstle, Sun Valley, Santa Margarita, Terra Linda, and Victor Jones are the ones. And then like Oleander is not in,
Some of the smaller
The pocket
pocket
parks.
little
Okay.
smaller pocket park, yeah.
Okay,
pocket
okay.
parks.
So no.
Jerry Russell is.
Jerry
Has
Russell
to be,
is
got
higher
like a
than-
Tinder, okay.
uh,
Okay, no, that's helpful. So building on that, we had talked about you talked about the discussion of playgrounds. And when I think of like city playgrounds, they're all in parks. We don't have any playgrounds, so I just want to confirm, so when we say city playgrounds, they would also in effect not have camping in it. Okay, correct, just want to make sure. Because, and in schools already, people can't camp on school property. So I guess I'm saying playgrounds, when I'm thinking about it, is there, and to me, having lived here for many, many decades, I can't think of a playground that would not be protected by, okay, so we can.
Because they're also in the 250 square
Yes.
feet of the school.
So that might be something I want to think about as we're writing this ordinance that's implied. Our current ordinance, and again, the first one was written, I don't remember, 2018, 2017, doesn't, it includes open space.
Correct.
Yeah, because there's been some misinformation out there about that. It doesn't,
The
but
reason we did
yeah.
that in the first place is interesting because it does correlate with the fire
Yeah.
zones,
Yeah.
is
No,
that
I heard.
we were having
Yeah.
these fires and cooking appliances.
Yeah, no, I
in the
remember that.
hills. And interestingly enough, and this kind of speaks to the moving around and is that when we prohibited camping in the open space in the hills, I think that's how we ended up with the encampment, or some of the result was the
yeah, no, I
encampment
understand.
in Albert Park.
Yeah, no, I just, as I said, there was some social media stuff that implied you could camp in open space, and I just want to, which I have a question on that later. So in terms of the data supporting the position, I think that's super interesting, and just as a reality is that we presented with Judge Chen lots of data that he just ignored. So, he just didn't, it didn't sway him either way. So I'm curious as that, would we, knowing that, still try to provide data as for calls for service at all, or we're just kind of moving away? I guess we really wouldn't, because we don't have any calls for service in the park because there's no one camping in the park. Okay.
And
Answer no?
the rationale from a legal.
Yeah, yeah,
perspective,
no,
I don't
answer
put words
my
in your
question.
mouth, is that we're not displacing anybody and it's not already a place that,
Okay.
I mean, it's
No, no,
it's kind of,
Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
yeah, well, it's,
It's a preventative measure in some respects because it's not
no, I understand. I
possible
think
that we could have an encampment.
I think in what we're gonna talk about when I'm done through my questions with Councilmember Kurtz is we're doing a preventative measure that actually there could be maybe an ordinance that would be more impactful, but because of concern that at current isn't founded, we're moving in one direction. So just being full, looking at that. The highway and road code, so people that are camping right near active roadways. So does that provide any setbacks or restrictions next to active roadways?
Right.
And I'm just thinking, because I understand about the setback, but I'm wondering if we're thinking about other data sets or other policies that are out there from the state. And really, I mean, this is one, because there's an individual, they're not there now, that was up here and I drove by them many, many times during the day and worried that they were going to step out into the road, like literally. So I was just curious if that has been utilized at all.
Don't know if
Okay.
we utilize that. I would think, for our roadways generally, just thinking about other public works
Yeah.
projects, we use the theory that you can't encroach into the public right of way. So if somebody set up an encampment that encroached into the street, that would be,
Sidewalk.
or the sidewalk,
Yeah.
those are the provisions that we would use. The streets and highway code and the vehicle code, both sort of set up like, here's an ordinance that this city can adopt, and, can meet these requirements. I can't think of anything off the top of my
Yeah.
head.
So we passed in 2017, don't quote me on that, the panhandling ordinance, and the backbone on that ordinance was around safety and roadways. So, I mean, to me, when I'm thinking about this, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And for folks that are unhoused, is there a way to keep them safe while they're in that condition? And I do worry about that, so that's why I'm pressing on that a little bit.
I worry about that piece too, and I think the legal analysis that Scott Emblich did when we were looking at the 5-foot setback, which is in the current ordinance. It's even five.
Okay.
Even if we were able to rely on some codes, some streets or highways code, I think where we run into the legal problem is that it's that cumulative effect. And really anything more than 5 feet ends up effectively banning camping on Anderson. And so then we run into that, like, okay, now we're in a much more difficult place to defend or prevail.
Which goes right next to my next question. And I do understand, we learned a lot about the federal court system over the last 2 years. It's more than I ever thought we would know at the council level. So Judge Chen, and I hear what you're saying, there are cities and towns in California that have banned camping. And so for us, the whole map thing, just that whole exercise was just, I felt highly inappropriate, but we had to do it because it was being mandated by the judge. So I'm just curious, and I know this is an impossible question to ask, but to hear that we could have these modifications and still have to do the map and do all these, like, jump through all these hoops, when actually we are within our legal right to push back and to ban camping in certain areas or cities. So that's the part I'm kind of stuck on that. I don't
Like,
know.
is legally he allowed to require us to do those sort of exercises?
That's a good way to phrase it. Yes, thank you.
So I guess what the cities can and can't do, post grants pass, that's still being figured out.
Okay, that's fair. that's
And
fair.
so, I think, the Fairfax that is being sued.
Well, they have a TRO.
And I don't know if, I know Fremont recently enacted, I think one of the strictest, and I don't know what their legal situation is. They did change it. Okay, so then.
Already.
So,
Then
so we
that's
have that. So that, so
That's
there's
fair.
still like,
Okay,
we just don't know. The
Okay,
law
that's
is
fair.
not settled yet. And so what we're trying to do is, look into the crystal ball
yeah.
a little bit
Mhm.
and figure out, again, what the policy options are and what we think is sensible.
So, given that, do you think, so with Judge Chen, we did a lot of negotiation back and forth, right? And so you asked for the whole cake, but we only got half the cake. So is that something that we would ever, as a strategy, a legal strategy, go for 2 cakes, knowing that we might only get half a cake, or is that not?
So I think like whatever our legal strategy would depend on the facts of that particular lawsuit and
Okay.
actually would be discussed in closed session.
Okay,
And so we have like theoretical right now.
yeah, okay,
But we don't really know until there is an actual lawsuit.
okay. That's.
All we're trying to do is be prepared.
Yeah, okay. And then 2 more questions. One is, and you brought up Anderson, and I worry about, we have not, so our current ordinance is time, place, and manner. And one thing we have not talked a lot about is this entrenchment issue. And what I think about when I say that term, if people are complying and they're not getting cited, so now we have 5 or 6 people. To me, having folks live the rest of their lives in a tent next to Anderson is not our goal as a city at all. So I'm curious if staff has any ideas. If we're gonna be putting an ordinance out there, we're gonna be running a risk of lawsuit. I'm curious what getting at entrenchment. So I don't know if that's every 4 weeks at campsites, wherever they are, next to City Hall. The woman that's living over there, I don't want her living here for 20 years. It's just not good for her, not good for anybody. So I'm
Yeah.
curious what an entrenchment piece would be, and we haven't been able to even get there before because we've had to do time, place, and manner.
Sure. I'll start with that and then you guys can back me up on
Yeah.
this. From my perspective, how do we get people housed is that we need an interim housing solution. And,
Yeah.
and that's the biggest barriers because of the cost and the challenge with finding a site. So say we had right now, I'll just say interim housing, so it's generic. Say we had a site with 50 units of interim housing. And then we could move people from the sanctioned camping area to the interim housing. And there's a flow, right, where people in Anderson then could come into the sanctioned camping area, or the person in City Hall could come to the sanctioned camping area. And then we've got the case management dedicated, the more ERF funds and funds that we can get, the faster people can move through that pathway. We've got to have the affordable housing units for them, like that's another challenge. But I think until we have an interim housing solution, you're going to be hard pressed to not have people camping at all in the city. And I think the more availability we have for shelter or interim housing. I'm looking at you, but my sense is the further we can move in towards a prohibiting camping, because if the premise is you need to have an alternative place for people to be that's more dignified and humane than a tent on the street, or, you know, then you've got to have somewhere else for them to go. And that's where we're heading. Like, that's what the goal is, but we've got no site and $2.5 million left to try to pull something off that's a multi-million-dollar project and program, and we need that partnership with the county to make that happen. I mean,
And I will just add on, as well as like speaking to like the entrenchment issue, particularly along Anderson and at City Hall, is that between Mel, Daniel, and Lynn, when we have been getting openings, due to people either like, you know, leaving the sanctioned camping area for any number of reasons, we have been able to move folks into the camping, sanctioned camping area from Anderson as well as City Hall. So that's why I think just, piggybacking off of what Christine says, like it's this larger flow, and that's like such a critical part of our ability to address the entrenchments ultimately.
I understand, and thank you. I mean, I do understand the bigger picture here, but in the interim, having that, and I think it's a negative for the community, and it's negative for the individual to become, because they're there. It's not just because of affordable housing. There's other issues that the folks might be dealing with that are there.
yeah,
And
mental
so,
health and
right,
substance abuse.
so if we're having that, to have them de facto, they get to live on the streets for the next 5 years in a tent in Anderson, that to me is a great solution. I guess I'm thinking or wondering if someone knows like, okay, I can be here for 2 months, whatever the time frame is, let's just say a set time frame, whatever that number is. And then I know that I actually need to leave this site for 2 weeks. Maybe that's a nudge, maybe it's I don't know, because I want to balance being humane, but I also, you know, we had the individual, was it up at Falkirk for 4 years, right? And so it just,
So I
the
think,
permanence, I think, there's kind of de facto permanence is what I'm trying to get at.
I think, you know, getting back to what problem are you trying to solve?
Yeah.
And what I heard is that the problem to be solved is we don't want somebody in an encampment for a long period of time. We want to move them into some sort of more permanent shelter. And if we set up an ordinance where they cannot stay in a certain location for more than, you know, let's say 30 days, whatever, and they're being forced to move, I could see plaintiff's attorneys turning that into a legal challenge that would be difficult to, not difficult. It would be challenging to defend against, just on that theory. And I will say, I don't really want to specify that.
Yeah.
But you know, I started out my legal career actually as a plaintiff's attorney suing.
Oh, you did, okay.
So I immediately thought of how I would challenge that. And so I think because the rotation isn't actually furthering the solution of housing that is outside of the streets, I would be concerned about that.
So, okay, that's super helpful. I love that you have both sides of your brain working on that one.
I also think, just real quick,
Yeah.
that our service providers that we work with, that we really rely on trying to like strike the balance.
Of course.
Because we've talked about solutions in that space before for that very reason, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they have really talked about the, you know, the trauma of moving people around. And I know you know that, Mary Kate, I'm just saying it for the public and the community, that it's something that it's another consideration around how do we address that?
Well, it's
problem.
balancing that as a community. We also realize it's not in the best welfare of that individual to spend the rest of their lives in a tent on Anderson. And so,
100%.
and so that's the part I'm wrestling with right now. Because otherwise, especially if other cities and towns are banning, well, it's like, well, we can go to San Rafael and get my little slice and I'm just gonna stay there. And even in the other part we have not talked about, so moving on from that, let's say they're offered a place at Mahone. Say they've been at City Hall, they've been Anderson, and now we're doing the pipeline that you talked about. I've offered it and the person's not interested. They're offered again and again because there's trust and everything else. At the end of the day, they never take it.
Like, where's the end of the line?
So wait, so they've never taken it, we've offered it over and over, and now they're like, no, I'm gonna live, perfect example is the individual that was up here at Volker, that we offered many, many times, wasn't interested, that ended up being a different type of case, but there would have been a legal right for them to forever stay in that space, so is there any ordinance or that can craft to get at that, or is it, I mean, I get this is really hard stuff, and I get that legal remedies are really blunt tools, but I'm just trying to understand if there's.
I don't, and again, this is kind of thinking off the top of my head. Based on what I understand, the housing situation to be in San Rafael, I don't think that this time period is necessarily the right time period for it. As Christine mentioned, keep moving the needle.
That's fair.
It may be an option at a later point. But I don't know if the data that's available would support that as a solution.
Yeah, that's interesting, especially because we know the landscape changing right now.
Yeah, I think one of the things, and it's similar to that, is, because I know this is a concern, is like, once we get people housed, then who else is gonna show up? Is, I think one of the strategies we're talking about, but I wouldn't suggest it for now, is that if we had more interim shelter available, we could start prohibiting camping. Like, we're gonna say we can't camp on this section of Anderson anymore. So it's not like this is a free for all. Anybody can come from anywhere and camp on Anderson forever, and we just increase our population. But it's a scaling back of available spaces as new available, better shelter options become available, so that we also prevent more migration into the city from other areas.
Okay, and then my last question, and I don't know if this is something that's being presented to the working group, just really around the information and getting accurate information out there. We've burned a lot of staff time on misinformation, social media hysteria, so I'm hoping that you talk about that, maybe
Yes.
the working group, that they might have some really good ideas about how to get accurate information out there. So do you have anything on that you can share with us?
So that is on the agenda for the work
Great.
group next week, is to have that conversation, because you are right. I mean, we have, I think, close to probably 90 FAQs. We've done videos, social media. So it's like, where are we missing the mark in terms of connecting with residents as it pertains to what the city's doing with homelessness, and having them provide that, first level, like, customer empathy. It's like, how else are they looking to connect with the city on this?
Is it possible, because I'd forgotten that there has the videos, there is FAQs, but people sometimes, they just want to go on Reddit, make their assumption and go on for that. Is there an AI solution on that? So if someone starts doing that, that a bot can come on and be like, this is great, go to the website. I mean, I'm just curious, like, I don't know, maybe we're, the AI fan. Just because the information's out there, that's the thing that's really frustrating, is that when people do take the time, and I know council members that feels this too, when people take the time and I actually give them the accurate information, they're like, oh, I had no idea because I read blah, 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 blah. So I'm trying to figure out if there's a way for the folks that are willing to learn more, that they can somehow, as opposed to trusting a resident to have to post it, but that the city.
Yes.
I have another thought.
Yeah.
Before you answer that one.
The bot.
Not a bot, I
Oh.
wish I had,
Okay.
sorry. But maybe having, and you would have to know if you have the right person to come give their story. And really have that real life experience and ask those questions, like, why did you choose to live on the street? Why were you, and somebody who's been on a path of resolution of success, how long have you been here? Where did you grow up? Whatever to hear, because when you hear those personal stories, it really makes it's like, I think people's perception of what homelessness is and the reality of what homelessness is are not aligned.
See, and that's awesome. And I know that we've done those like lived experiences. The reality is when someone's sitting there on their computer, they're not taking the time to go even watch the video. So what happens is someone posts something and then someone else reads it and they repost it. And now we have this big conflagration on social media. So I'm trying to figure out if there's a way at that initial post to be like, hey, let's have accurate information here. So So I agree with you, that as part of the storytelling, and we do have something similar, I've seen it on one of the, county websites, they did a whole video, but I don't know, I'm just curious, it might be a question for Sean Noe, and it would be, we could try a pilot on it, and it would be triggered on maybe a keyword that would happen. I have no idea, but it's just, I mean, the threads that I see are just unbelievable. So it would just, that way, staff is actually spending time on the issue versus trying to rectify the misinformation that's out there.
Yeah.
So, but
It's definitely stuff that we can look into in terms of AI. I've
Yeah.
had similar thoughts of like just
Yeah.
getting a professional chat GPT subscription and throwing all the FAQs in and creating a chatbot so residents could just go and ask their questions.
that
Not
would
like,
be
what are you doing? But like
Yeah.
making sure that
Yeah.
it is like
It actually
locked in
does.
so it doesn't like
actually-
start,
yeah.
what is it? When the chatbots kind of go off and start making up their own
Hallucinate?
stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, that's like the one part of it that I'm like, a little
Yeah.
bit, but, to
But if our
your-
content is really strong, sorry, John, if the
Yeah.
content is really strong, the solution is a better solution,
Right.
so.
And we used to, long before Nextdoor became, well, it just became what it is. We did used to post on there as a city and we would try to provide accurate information, but it just doesn't work in today's environment, unfortunately.
It's just really hard, like Meta does the blocks.
It's
Right.
not even a block, it's just getting information.
I know, but you have to identify what it is to then send the right information.
And I wanted to just call out for what you raised, because it's such a like salient point in terms of like the storytelling of
Mhm.
homelessness and then also the cities. And then I know that Mel has been working with our counterparts at the county on this. I don't know if you want to give us some updates on that work.
Yeah, I think we haven't posted anything yet, but we're kind of working on a campaign for communication, so especially around ERF3. So the county has some folks who are kind of dedicated to that within the HHS, Health and Homelessness. So they're working on that.
And that would be something they create pieces that then would be on the website, or we could put out through the newsletter.
Yeah, it would be like news posts as well as maybe social media.
We've done that. And they were really impactful.
Yeah.
Okay, so those were my many questions. Well, you go view for more questions and then.
I
any
actually,
comments.
I
Yeah.
think I move on the comments on the reason
Okay, don't go.
I don't have a lot of questions is I am not inclined to take a change to our ordinance. We are making, I feel it's slow, right? But I feel like we are making so many positive steps right now. We haven't been sued and, we don't have a TRO in months. And we've actually been able to make progress because you as the staff and our service partners and everybody else has been focused on working with people to get them in the right path to housing, which is what we need. We need to also focus on the interim housing solution. I think that is a priority. I'm afraid that if we do anything else in changing an ordinance, which could potentially result in another legal thing, it takes you all off course. Because we will get told by a judge, now you need to do X, Y, and Z, and now you need to do this. And then we'll have people in the community saying, well, where are we at with an interim housing solution? Well, we can't get to it. There's only X amount of staff to be able to work on this work, and I'd much rather have you working on the solutions that we know need to happen. And again, the data's not there showing that there's a problem. If the data's there, that's a different conversation. We can absolutely come back. If all of a sudden Terra Linda Park becomes a full-on encampment, we absolutely have to have that conversation. Again, I'm not comfortable using the hazard severity maps. I think it will dilute what we need those maps to do, which is to work in the urban environment to support defensible space. They're not designed for addressing encampments. And we have an investment in the rangers, right? We are one of 2 jurisdictions that have that investment using the Measure C tax funds to support the rangers. That is specifically to identify people in open space and in parks and other areas and are really effective in the work that they're doing. Yes, we need to address to make sure people have accurate information. That is not solved through an ordinance. We need to make sure that we're focusing on interim housing. That's not focused in a change to an ordinance. I think our ordinance is gives us a lot of tools to work with the homeless community. And I'd be concerned right now to go off track and potentially, which 99% of the time, every time we've gone through something, we end up getting sued. And we get a TRO. Why would we wouldn't expect anything different. If I felt like an ordinance would solve the problem, which I still haven't heard what the problem is, then I'd say, let's talk about an ordinance change, but I'm not hearing a problem enough that an ordinance is solving that. If you came in and said, we need interim housing, and we're gonna do an ordinance to make interim housing, it doesn't tie together, but I'd be like, yeah, that's right. We need interim housing, because we need housing and interim housing. Right, so that's.
No, that's good, that was good comments. So I'm glad the working group is, that we created this working group. I know they have one more meeting as part of this is also the community. And so there's a perception that we have as policymakers, and then there's the community perception, some realities, some not. And I actually do support doing a revision of the ordinance and running the risk of the lawsuit. The preventative measure and I think time the data, I hear you loud and clear about what those fire maps are gonna be every which way. I don't think it precludes us from using it in another way as well. And I think having that preventive measure, I have concerns that the jurisdictions around us that seem to have zero compassion for fellow human beings. Hopefully that's recorded. We can send that to all the other cities and towns as they ban or restrict it, that folks are going to naturally come into Somerville. So, and they'll look for a place we won't have a band in the park. And then we're going to have just, I think, making it even more difficult. So it is, to me, offering a protective or preventative measure. And you're right, it's not a problem. Now we have had very small issue in Bristol Park, but not really an issue that I know that they all did voluntary compliance. Peacock Gap, no one's ever been out there, never will be. So I get all of that, but Sun Valley's nearby. Our parks nearby. So, having said that, I mean, I want to hear what the working group has to say, and what I appreciate is that you talked about it as trade-offs, because what I find in doing policy, most folks don't understand that there's always trade-offs to everything. And so I do appreciate the risk that you talked about, Andrea. I think that's really helpful. Will there be a city attorney at the meeting on Thursday?
So,
Yeah, we are, I think, we're gonna ask Rob,
Okay,
as well as Andrea.
yeah, because I, oh, yep,
We're trying to, I know, but I'd like to just have Rob come there also as an elected city attorney to also help, talk with the residents.
Yeah.
members of that group.
because I think it would be important in that group that, so how many people are in that group? 20? That everyone gets a chance to do the weighing in. So however you do that, so it's not just a few people that get to dominate, but I really want to hear from all 25 people that have gone to all 3 meetings to say, you know, to kind of hear that, to wrestle with it and to be able to hear each other wrestle with it would be really interesting. So that would be important to come back to the council. And again, you know, as a council, you know, 5 of us, we're not always going to agree. And that's how we get the best policy and the best kind of thoughtfulness as we move forward carefully. Because playgrounds are also inherent, that earlier question I had with parks, that to me is another reason why it's a hard thing. It's just, to me, it's a hard thing to defend, recognizing that negative impact of homeless encampments next to playgrounds. Like, I have a hard time justifying that. It just, as a parent, as a member of the community, it's hard to talk to people about that. So I do think having the park will de facto cover the playground issue. And I would almost want to have the ordinance go farther, but there might not be an appetite for that. And I hear you very clearly, Maria, that the risk, not that you said this, but it definitely goes up the farther we go. And so I would be curious. I think that this would be very defensible if we had got Judge Chen again. Maybe we get Judge Ullman. You never know. Maybe Judge Chen's going to get on vacation for a while or something. Maybe,
you never know.
You never
It's not a
know.
guarantee.
So it seems like we didn't really help you in terms of the staff recommendation. It's like, I think it's fair to say to the working group, you know, when you look at all of this, when we're trying to solve the problem that might come down,
Yep.
that the subcommittee has 2 different opinions, and we want you guys to wrestle with it as well.
One thought I had about that as you were
Yeah.
asking for that I think may be helpful because,
Yeah.
you know, there's been a lot of discussion and debate in that group, and I think it is every individual still has their own experience with it, and we've talked
Yeah.
here about options and
Yeah.
what the options are and the layering of the options and how that increases legal risk, and we give that same presentation to the working group. And I wonder, I'm not trying to create too much work for this, but whether it's a dot exercise or, you do these like real-time easy peasy polls where,
Yeah.
you know, say.
Yeah, I talked about it last
Oh,
week. You can use your phone
Yeah.
and it comes up there, so
So
all
that
25.
there's some anonymity, so that
Yes.
there, you know,
Yes.
because I think
Great
that
minds
is
think
a
alike.
helpful way to get like the
You were
data that,
working on that, weren't you?
that's awesome. So
Yeah.
I'd love to be able to kind of present to the council, you know, of the group of people that were there. This is not a representative sample of the entire city,
not.
of course not, but it's a pulse check
Yeah.
on the group that's been, you know, had some education and has a deeper understanding than.
That's great. I love that idea, because we talked about it last week, but I like the anonymity part, and I like that, because then you can say, oh, well, with this group, would anyone want to weigh in whether they voted on that or not, as to what, how their reactions were. That's just a great way to get
Yeah.
conversation about it. And also as part of that, you'll be asking for their ideas, the working group's ideas about how to get good quality information out there, and just their ideas, because I'm curious, and as well as the content that they would need, lived experience or FAQs or whatever it is like.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there any other, before we go to public comment, but is there any other, after this discussion, that any of you would want to partake? Daniel, you haven't said much, you've been listening, no, you've been a sponge, you have been a sponge, though, I can see.
Always, yeah, no, I have nothing more.
Okay,
I just want to say how much I appreciate the perspectives of the subcommittee, and this is a really difficult situation, and I think it's really good government. It doesn't mean we, as policymakers or staff, we always have to agree. This is a really, really difficult territory, and I think it represents the challenge that we face in the breadth of right answers
Yeah.
there really are, and different perspectives of the entire community. So I think the feedback you're giving us, even though there isn't 100% alignment from the subcommittee, is really super helpful to us in kind of moving the conversation forward, because we always want to bring a recommendation to the council that gives you as much information as you need to make a really well-informed decision. And we are not, our job is to not be attached to our staff recommendation or it being modified. That's part of why we have a democratic process and public meetings. So thank you.
fantastic. Any other comments? No? Okay, we have a little bit of time. Any members of the public would like to speak? I have my timer here. I'll start it and you get 2 minutes. You are welcome, but not required to say your name and what part of San Rafael you live in.
To fairly address the camping ordinance that affects certain concerned citizens, including unhoused persons, the city needs to conduct a public CEQA process to study environmental impacts, feasibility mitigations, and feasibility alternatives. As there are potentially significant environmental impacts that the city can and should address by regulating the time, place, and manner of camping. Exemption from CEQA is not supported. I would like to add that I do live out of Kentucky, and I'm very concerned about fires. China Camp goes up in flames, we're frightened, there's no way out. And they have been out there. I live out there, I've seen them out there. No, the tents aren't up, they aren't in your parks either. But you're allowing them to be there, they will be ready.
Thank you. You done with your public comment? You have 45 more seconds. You want to keep going? Thank you. Okay, hold on.
You can always submit something.
Well, we're right at the base of China Camp Park, and they would be right at the base of China Camp. And that's not going to keep them from wandering up into China Camp, which is
Okay.
right 10 minutes.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Anyone else like to speak? Speak now, or I'm gonna go to the next agenda item.
Well, my name is Joanne Sontag. I have a home across the street from Rob Epstein. That's the house I actually grew up in. I own that house. I actually live in Duck Gap. I am the owner of the Goodwill Building. Ritter was my grandfather, Alex Ritter.
Oh, my
I have a book about him. I just donated to the city, just one thing. 120-year-old horse's head, because that building used to be the livery station in 1900. So Jeff Kramer has that. I own apartments over in Purcell Park, in Wall Street. And so I'm a big property owner. My mother, my late mom, Margaret Oakley, Margaret Oakley, she was on Channel 2 News in 1992 or 3 with the owner of a very well-known restaurant here in town, at which I play the piano. They were in the process of putting Ritter House into place, and my mom refuted it. She said, please put them outside the city. Please do something different. It was unbeknownst to us that they'd used the name on the street sign that was named after my grandpa for the building. They did. And I'm not against homeless people. Many times I'd get out of the restaurant with leftovers. I had forks in my car. I'd go to Walgreens. I'd give a fork and leftovers to people that were hungry. I'm not opposed to Section 8. I'm not opposed to any of the city functions for that. I have my tenants through Section 8 and have been for 30 years. So here's the thing. We have homeless versus homeowners. And I've actually talked to 2 of the people in here that I have total respect for on this board. The homeless people don't need to be in the parks. There's too many bad things about those parks that they face. They face lack of food, lack of water, lack of resources. They'd be kind of forced to steal out of our gardens, our homes, whatever garbage cans. There's no way it's going to be healthy for them. And the record does show that their life expectancy is great. There's going to be disease and rodents and trash and all the things that all the other communities have had. I recently put together, just for fun, because I like
Just finish your last thought.
my last thought
Yeah.
is, we need to come to a balance between what the homeowners need, which is not to have them there. They have their success stories, we have ours. We earn money, we got professions, we put mortgages together, 20, 30-year-old mortgages. We don't need to have them there frightening us.
Thank you for your comments, and we'll have to figure out that horse head that Jeff Kramer has. That's a great story. Thank you for sharing that.
I do love that. I got a picture.
Okay, anyone else want to speak? Okay. Well, we appreciate staff as always. Going the next step, I think what was really important, and the whole reason we had the working group really was to go the next step and to figure out what an iteration might be if an iteration does go forward. So the next item on this is future agenda items. I don't know if that's for discussion or is that probably a report out on the
Just
working group?
yeah, just a quick check-in with both of you is just looking at scheduling these meetings for the remainder of the fiscal year. I know the team's working on a couple updates regarding the city-county partnership, so we're going to want to schedule another one of these for April to talk with you about that,
Great.
as well as May and June. Then moving forward into the next fiscal year, getting us into a more regular schedule of these and looking to alternate the meetings of this group with the Economic Development Subcommittee, so it's like every other month. We would go on a bi-monthly basis, but working with Lindsay and her team on doing that also.
Okay, that sounds great.
Andrea, are we allowed to ask the committee if they have any agenda items they would like to ask?
This would be the agenda.
Do we have any update? Well, future agenda, it'd be great to know where we are with interest opportunities.
Yes.
Is it okay if I say staff's been doing a lot of great work on that?
That's a perfect 1-sentence response.
And one thing that's tricky about this subcommittee is homelessness and housing are related, but they're 2 different subjects. And that really came out in our goals and objective setting. So I think my future agenda item is how do we put them in the same meeting or go back and forth? So the tenant protections that the work has been going on, that did come up in the public goals and objectives, tenant protection. So that to me is how do we keep that conversation going forward? So I'd be interested in stuff on that.
And sort of related to some of the conversation we had today is like China Camp was brought up. That's under state jurisdiction, not city, state parks. So I'm curious if state parks have anything or the county, as China Camp is not in sort of our purview.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Finally, we have public comments. Is any item not on the agenda? And we are here to listen. So anything, you got anything? Anything you'd like to share?
Can I just say one more thing?
You have 2 minutes to say whatever you like.
Many of these campers don't want to be housed. I know it for a fact. So just keep that in mind.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment? Okay, not seeing any. This meeting is adjourned 10 minutes early. Do something brave with that extra 10 minutes in your life. Thank you.